We are continuing with the study of the HeTer Mechira, and we looked at the Yisodos in the Gemara, the principles in the Gemara, from which we can learn whether Shmita bezman HaZeh is the Reis or Derabbanan, from the Torah, from the rabbis. And at this point, we have to look at the Rambam. There are two Rambams that deal with this. The first one is in Shmita Viyovel, Perek Yud Halacha Tes. ובזמן שהיובל נוהג דין עברי. At the time when the Jubilee year applies, we also have the din of Eved, a Hebrew slave. Vodin bate ari Choma. There are special laws if you buy or sell a house in a walled city. Vodin sidei Xaramim, and the halacha of fields that are given to the temple. Vodin stay Achuza, and the halachas of an inherited field that goes back in the inheritance, the division of Yahushua. ומקבלין ger Tושב, and we have the concept of a ger Tושב, which isn't a ger tzedek, a convert to Judaism, but someone who accepts Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach in front of a beis din. ונוהגת שביעית בארץ, והשמטת כספים בכל מקום מן התורה. And the Shmita occurs in Eretz Israel, and the release from all debts occurs in every place in the world. ובזמן שאין היובל נוהג, and when there is no yovel, no jubilee, אינו נוהג אחד מכל אלו. None of these apply. חוץ משביעית הארץ והשמטת כספים בכל מקום מדבריהם כמו שביארנו. Other than the release from debts, every place, and Shmita in Eretz Israel, as we have explained. Now, in Perek Dalet, Halacha HaZeh, the Rambam says, Ein shvi'is noheges ela be'eretz Israel b'vad. Shmita only applies in Eretz Israel. Shnamaris, it says, Ki savo el haaretz, when you come into the land. V'noheges bein bifnei habayis, bein shelo bifnei habayis. And it occurs whether there's a temple there or not the temple there. Now, the Kesef Mishnah on this has a unique way of learning the Rambam. Most people understand that the Shmita occurs when there's a temple, when there's not a temple, and when there's not a temple, it's a din derabbanan, just like he explains later on in Perek Yud. However, the Kesef Mishnah says as follows: U'midivrei Rabbeinu po, and from the words of our rabbi here, nirei shu sover da'av shelo bifnei habayis noheg is mina Torah. It appears that our rabbi thinks, meaning the Rambam thinks, that when the temple is not standing, Shmita still occurs according to Torah law. Upasak hi de Tanakama, and he paskins like the Torah's Kohanim. Mishum demashma dahahi kachachamim de pligi alei de Rebbe, v'halacha karabim. And it appears that he's paskining like the Chachamim, that disagree with Rebbe, and we have a debate between one person and a group. The halacha is like the Rabbim, is like the many people. There is much more in the Kesef Mishnah. You can read it on your own. I've included it in the notes below. But the Kesef Mishnah seems to have a unique way of looking at this issue. He's saying there are other poskim that say this as well. However, the Kesef Mishnah seems to be in the minority in understanding that the Rambam says that Shmita bezman HaZeh is the Reisa. Now, Rabbeinu Chaim Soloveitchik has an interesting understanding of this from here and other places. He says that there are two possibilities, which is the classic thing that Reb Chaim does. He says, is the din of Shmita dependent upon Rov Yoshvei Haleha, that the majority of each of the tribes, the majority of all of Klal Yisrael and so on, is in Eretz Yisrael? Or is it that Eretz Yisrael has to be conquered by the majority of the people? So let's look at Reb Chaim. Kol Yoshveha, all of its inhabitants, Einu Toloi Klal B'Shas Kiddush Haaretz. This isn't depending upon when the land is sanctified. Im hayu az kol yoshveha leha imlo, whether all of its inhabitants were there at the time or not. V'im ken memela dela'ati lavo kevan sheyitiv ashru az kol yoshveha. Therefore, in the future, at the time when the majority or all of its inhabitants are there, memela yachzor az lios hiyovel nohag. Then, at that point, the Yovel will come back into being, meaning as soon as 51% of Klal Yisrael, or all of Klal Yisrael, depending on how you understand this, lives in Eretz Yisrael, then immediately the Yovel begins to apply, and all of these other things, of course, would apply from Torah law as well. The Hanire Lomar Bezeh, and it appears that we can say in this, Al Pimash Pasik Rambam, based upon what the Rambam paskins, Alecha Truma Shel Torah, Ela Be'eretz Yisrael Bavad. There is not any type of truma from the Torah other than in Eretz Yisrael. Ubezman Shekol Yisrael Sham, and at a time when the majority of the Jewish people is there. Shenamar, as it says, Ki Savo, when you will come into the land, Bias Kulchem. This means that all of you have to enter the land. So, Vihine, and according to this, Hari be'emes betruma lo kasiv klal ki savo. How can you say this? Because in fact, with truma is one of the mitzvahs that, even though it's Tului Baretz, it doesn't say when you enter the land this occurs. V'tzarich lomar di yilpe mi ki savo. Nonetheless, we can say you have to learn it from ki savo. Ha'amor b'shmita v'yovel, that applies with Shmita and Yovel. Why would it be dependent upon Shmita and Yovel? Mishum de trumos and maestros taluim b'shnosas Shmita, because what trumos and maestros and exactly how they're separated are different in the first, second, fourth, fifth year is one way of separating maestros, and in the third and sixth year it's a different way. So therefore, we can't separate trumos and maestros properly unless we know which year we are in the Shmita cycle. Therefore, truma is dependent upon Shmita, and in the seventh year there isn't any truma and maestros at all because everything's hefker. Therefore, separating Trumas and Meiser is dependent on Shmita. So it doesn't have to say, Reb Chaim says, Ki Savo by Trumas and Meisers, for us to know, because it's dependent on Shmita, and Shmita depends on Ki Savo, that therefore also Trumas and Meisers depend on Ki Savo. And according to this, it appears, Vadai de Shmita v'yovel gam ken sarich bias kulchem l'das Rambam. Therefore, Shmita and Yovel also require that when we enter the land of Eretz Yisrael, it's through all of Klal Yisrael. Kamo Trumas Meiser, just like he's learned with Trumas Meiser, meaning once we've established there's an absolute connection with Trumas Meiser, when we know something about one of them, that's also true about the other one. Vine hach dina de bias kulchem. And when we're looking at this halacha about all of you entering Eretz Yisrael, lo dami lahach dina de kol yoshvei halacha. It is not the same as all the inhabitants living in Eretz Yisrael. Dimvur behasugya da archin daf lamed beis, as we've learned in archin daf lamed beis, shehevainu lemala detalui rak b'shnas yovel, that when we are brought to on high, this is only dependent upon which year we are in the Shemitah cycle, atzmo, ub'shato im hayu az kol yoshvei halacha im lo, and it depends then whether all of the people are in Eretz Yisrael or not. Aval lo ken hach dina de bias kulchem, but this is not the halacha of all of you entering the land. Ikrohu al shas bia v'yerusha. This depends upon the time when we enter the land and the time we divide up the land. Da'az hu tzarich sheyeh bias kulchem. That is the time when all of you have to be entering at the same time. V'ki mochiach lashon Rambam b'perak aleph mihilchos trumos. And what can we prove from what the Rambam says in the first parak of Hilchos Trumos? Shekasav v'zeh lashon, that he wrote as follows: Shenamar ki savo bias kulchem, when all of you enter Eretz Yisrael, kashayu birusha rishona. This is the time when you first inherited the land in the time of Yahushua. V'kamo shehem atidim lachzor birusha shlishis, and that's the same way we will inherit it the third time, not the second time, but the third time. Lo kashayu birusha shnia shahaisa b'mei Ezra. not the second time there's time in the desert. Shahaisa bias miktsas, when only some of the people entered the land at that point. Ulefichach lo chayvo oso min Torah. That is why during the second temple time there was no obligation from the Torah to keep Shmita and Yovel. There was no Yovel during the Bayis Sheni. And if there was no Yovel, then there's no Shmita from Torah. So when we look at Shmita bezman HaZeh, whether it's midiraisa or derabbanan, there are a few poskim that hold that Shmita bezman HaZeh is deraisa. The Beis Halevi, Chelik Al Gimel, Tshuva Aleph, Meshiv Devar, the Tziv Chelik Beis, Yoredea Siman Nun Vav. However, the vast number of the poskim, of the later poskim, hold that it's midirabanan. The Peyas HaShulchan, Rav Kook, and Shabbos Haaretz, the Chazon Ish, and Hilchos Shmita, the Avnei Nezer, the Achiezer, the Minchas Yitzah, Kibiya Omer. And if you look in Yavia Omer, and I have the sites for all of this in the notes, you will see that he has a complete list of all the poskim on both sides. And if you're interested, you can look there to see a complete list. But as you go through the complete list, it's very clear that the vast majority of the poskim hold bezman HaZeh that Shmita is derabbanan. If Shmita is derabbanan, there are leniencies that are allowed in a din derabbanan that are not allowed in a din deraisa. And in the next Shiur, we will continue to look at the various different aspects of HeTer Mechira. Everyone should have a wonderful, uplifting day.